If you have a Power BI portfolio project sitting on your GitHub or in any folder somewhere and it has never once come up in an interview, then I want to tell you why, because I have been in that situation earlier. Most portfolio projects fail for one simple reason. They prove that you can follow a tutorial, but they do not prove that you can think like an analyst. And interviewers can tell that difference in about 10 seconds. In my case, what led me to a couple of job offers where I have a project that got two separate interview discussions to, and also the interviewers to ask me on and also walk through them in detail. So today I'm going to break down exactly what made that project different so you can build yours the same way. Here is the test I wish someone had given me earlier. Uh, Before you build anything, ask yourself the first question is to what problem am I actually solving and for whom? A tutorial project answers a different question, such as what does this data set look like when I apply these five techniques? That's more likely a demonstration of technique, but it's not a demonstration of your judgment. An interviewer does not actually care about you if you know how to build a matrix visual or if you know how to write a calculate function. They care mostly about whether you look at a messy real world problem and make good decisions about how to represent it. And that is the entire gap between a forgettable project and a memorable one. So here is a structure I use now and the one that I would tell anyone starting from scratch to follow. The first and foremost is to start with a problem statement written in one or two sentences before you touch any data. I know this is most widely told in couple of videos or any sorts of post, but do we even realize are we kind of trying to solve a problem? So the first thing is importantly is to understand the problem statement and have it written, and have it specifically written. For example, not as an analyze sales data, it must be more specific into something called or like sales leadership cannot tell which regions are underperforming relative to their own historical trend, not just against each other. So that specificity is what shows judgment before you have written a single line of DAX query. The second is to choose or create a data set that has some genuine messiness in it, because real business data is never clean. It's the most messiest thing that you can ever see. And if your project uses a perfectly pre-cleaned Kaggle data with zero nulls and no ambiguity, you most likely skip the part of the work that most analysts or BI engineers actually demonstrate. So that is very specific important part. The third is to document your decisions, not just your output. We most likely get carried away building data dashboards, visuals, and try to see how we could make it better. But more than that, is it conveying the decision that has to be taken? So couple of things that you have to reiterate during this process is why do you choose a star schema over a flat schema or a table? Why do you pick this specific DAX pattern over a simpler one? And also a shorter written explanation, even one or three sentences per major decisions, which helps your project to become more of a visible thinking process than a finished artifact. And the fourth is to build something that answers the original problem statement specifically, not a generic dashboard with every visual type you know how to build. And if your problem was about a regional underperformance, your final report should make the answer more obvious within 5 seconds of opening it. Now let me look into what to build and what to avoid. So on what to build, pick a domain that you can speak to with some authority, even if it is a little authoritative process. So if you have any background in retail, healthcare, finance, or logistics, etc., try to use those domain knowledge. Domain context makes your decisions more sound and informed rather than being arbitrary. So if you do not have a domain knowledge, for example, couple of people who work on are highly technically savvy but work on different parts of domain or specificity. So for those people, I would recommend pick something that you're genuinely curious about and can research quickly. For example, public transit data, housing prices, something with real news angle that you can reference. So this curiosity helps the interview to read as though you are more authentic person, and you deliver your personality in through those experience as well. On what to avoid, skip anything that has become a cliche in every beginner portfolio. For example, Titanic survival analysis, generic superstore analysis or sales dashboard, COVID case trackers. These are all generic ones and has been used countless times, and if interviewers see those, they never catch the eye of the interviewer, to be honest. These analysis are not their bad exercises, it's just that it's not worthy to put yourself be the right candidate for the position. So most of the time interviewers have seen 500 versions of them, and your project will not stand out no matter how well you build it. So, for example, my own project, I would link in my description below. I had one Power BI project portfolio as well as an AI analytic assistant project that worked specifically because nobody in my interview pool had built a natural language to SQL tool. So it was the most asked question in couple of interview discussions, and it was more of specific. It was a personal experience that I converted into a project, so I could explain exactly why I built it in first place. Now let's look into how to talk about it in an interview. Now building the project is only half the work. The other half is about being ready for the exact questions that made mine work as well, which is to tell the purpose of this project. When you get that question, do not start with the tech stack. Start with the problem in one sentence, exactly like your problem statement. Then walk through your two or three most important decisions and why you made them, and save the technical details for a follow-up question, not as a opening answer. So this basically mirrors how a senior person actually talks about your work, and it gives you a differentiation because most of the juniors lead with what tools they've used because that's where they start from schooling. However, senior leads with why they the problem mattered and what they decided to do about it, so that those helps in a longer way. Practicing those that order out loud even once before an interview changes how confident you sound answering it live. Now that we covered what to say, what to avoid, and what not to do, stuff like that, the most important thing is to have a checklist before you call it done, because it's important to have a checklist where you can ideally check each one of the boxes and say that okay, if your project is ready or not. So before you consider a project is finished, run through this checklist. The first and foremost is that can you state the problem in one sentence without mentioning any tool or technique. Second is, does your dataset have some real messiness you had to handle, not just a pre-formatted data? This helps in a follow-up question which you are already prepared for. The third is, have you written down your three biggest decisions and the reasoning behind each one, such as why this visual, why this particular DAX patterns, or what processes did you follow to answer the business question. So that helps a lot. The fourth is, does your final report answer the specific problem you shared or you started with, rather than showcasing every skill you know. And the final checklist is, can you explain the purpose of the project aloud under 30 seconds without notes. So I can't stress more on the final part because the last checkpoint is much more important, because most of us doesn't have to be sounded like we memorize the answer or the problem statement, but at the same time it has to flow through your communication. So I would recommend having all these checklist ready in order to see if your portfolio project is ready. And honestly, if you have a project worth putting in front of an interviewer, it's better to be prepared than to not have prepared at all. So if you want to know the fuller story of how this exact approach led me to an offer during my job search journey, I have a video on that. I will link it in the description box, or I will drop it in the card above. Subscribe if you want more practical real world guidance on BI and data career in Canada specifically. I post every Wednesday. Drop a comment with the domain or dataset you're thinking about building your next project around. I read every one of them, and it helps also me to shape a future video if that helps the audience. So, see you on Wednesday.